Thank you for joining us. This webinar is being recorded and will be published to a blog that instructional designers and student support specialists and administrators alike at the College of Graduate and Professional Studies will be posting information and teaching tips and just useful stuff for faculty and fellow instructional designers out in the field. And I'm just going to plug that real quick. You can find that at vision.une.edu. This recording will be going up there later today. So, yay. So, just to start everything off, I'm going to sort of give you guys a little bit of a history of rubrics, just a brief one, before I introduce Sarah Cochran, who will be delivering the bulk of this webinar. But I don't know if everyone knows where rubrics come from, where the term rubric comes from. Rubric means red text, and actually one of its primary histories was that it was being used for the instructional sort of how to deliver a Catholic Mass in the margins. And that would be written in the margins in red text of Catholic missals. And that is, pretty interesting when we think about just sort of like what rubrics are today in education, because we tend not to think of like the rubric as the instructions. We think of it as, the means of assessment, but really, and I think Sarah's going to be touching upon this, the relationship between the instructions and the assessment should be, as tight as possible. And, if you think about sort of one of the fundamental challenges of assessment today is how we sort of make the assessment and the instructions and the actual assignment for the students sort of get as close as possible to the actual application that the students will have to do when they're professionals of the various sort of skills and tools that we're trying to teach them. And so in a Catholic Mass where the priest is being given, has the instructions laid out before them, deviating from that is immediately accessible and is something that is very easy to recognize and to measure because of the strictness of the instructions of the rubric that is laid out before them. And so, I think Sarah's going to talk about this, in all of the separate subjects that we work on as instructors, and in all of the separate assignments that we give to our students, we strive to have our instructions and our rubric and the path that students take in fulfilling the assignments that we give to them. We strive to have those speak to be as tightly integrated with each other as possible, and to reflect reality, so that the simulation is as close to reality as possible. And all of these things are in sort of the design of the rubric, but also in how instructors and faculty, facilitators, whatever your role may be called, how you grade and give feedback using the rubrics that are given to you. So what I'm going to ask right now is basically a poll, and I think I have a question. I have Marta who wrote in, thank you, Marta, that she has always thought of rubrics as assessment guides to students. And I think that is, certainly I think it's useful to have that distinction between the instructions and how the assignment is going to be assessed. I think it's useful to us, our brains, to be able to think about them separately, but ultimately they should inform each other to the point that they are part of the same whole. And Sarah might touch upon that. I'm going to send out a poll, which I would love it if everyone answered. Oh my gosh. Sarah just pointed out I don't use rubrics. That's very embarrassing. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll because it seems like people have stopped weighing in. and I'm going to share the results. And
Yes.
it looks like everyone's using rubrics, which is great. But it also looks like we have a little bit of a divide in the attendance here between people who find them helpful and people who find them frustrating. And I'm sure that that isn't a clean distinction. Some people might find some rubrics on some assignments helpful and others very frustrating. Hopefully, Sarah can use this information and use her presentation to speak to all of you about how to use rubrics and feel awesome about it. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Sarah and hide the, well, I'm not going to hide these results. She might have something to say about them. But here's Sarah Cochran, a fellow instructional designer, and she's going to give the rest of the presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Cochran, like Chris said, and basically my part of the presentation is going to have 3 sections. So we'll discuss why we use rubrics, the basic anatomy of a rubric to help everyone use them more efficiently, and also how to use them in Blackboard, because I find that's kind of tricky because Blackboard actually kind of hides them from you. So we'll go through that as well. And as we go through, if you have any questions, please just type them in and I will answer them as soon as possible. So the first slide that I'm going to talk about, and so we're not in presentation mode, so some of my slides might be kind of a hot mess because they have different parts to them, a part 1 and a part 2, but we'll get through that. So this first slide, what I wanted to talk about is what rubrics can do for you. There are numerous reasons why we use rubrics at UNE. Every term we have multiple sections of the same course running at one time, and rubrics allow us to be clear about what is required for an assignment, what criteria should be assessed, and the weight of each criteria item. This is a useful tool for both students and instructors. Rubrics ensure that instructors are looking for the same elements across all submissions, making sure all students are being graded using the same expectations. Rubrics create consistency across the different sections of the same course. Students usually have many questions about their grades. Rubrics help to answer a lot of these questions. If students ask questions after an assignment is graded, you can point to specific items in the rubric and provide directed feedback. Rubrics really help to demystify grades for students, which also helps you as instructors. So on this next slide, now that we've talked about what rubrics can do for you, let's turn our attention to what they can do for your students. A clear assignment prompt is great, but when it is paired with an effective rubric, it is even better. An effective rubric clearly lays out assignment expectations for the students. It allows the students to see what needs to be included and what will be assessed and to what degree. In addition, once the instructor is done grading the assignment, it tells the students how they scored on each criteria item. This is much more useful than seeing a big B at the top of your paper. This allows the students to grow and improve from this assignment. My favorite part about rubrics is that it allows for directed feedback from the instructor. For each item in the rubric, you, the instructor, are able to provide feedback on that specific criteria. This directs the focus of the feedback instead of providing overall comments. What did the student miss when it comes to, let's say, the thesis criteria? What could they do better? What did they do well? And what is it that we want the students to take away? Or what is it that we want the students to take and apply on the next assignment to incorporate your feedback for future assignments or in their real life? So that's the value of rubrics from the student side of things. So now let's turn our attention to the actual anatomy of our rubric, so the different pieces that goes into building a rubric. And as you can see from this slide, the assignment prompt is really where everything starts. When we're developing rubrics, we first need an assignment prompt. All assignment prompts should align to the rubric used to assess the assignment. To the right, we have provided an example of the assignment prompt that has been broken down. And what you'll see as we go through the presentation is actually each criteria item, each different colored item here is assessed in the rubric. So you really want that alignment between what is set in the assignment prompt and what you're assessing in the rubric. And the rubric almost turns out to be an extra set of instructions for the students, because you're actually telling them what you're looking for when you're assessing each criteria item, which ties the prompt and the rubric together. So this slide talks about the different proficiency levels. So there are many different kinds of rubrics, such as a 4-column, a 3-column, and a binary column rubric. The proficiency levels are always at the top of the rubric. They state the different levels of achievement for the students on each criteria item. So actually, this is the rubric from the example on the previous slide. This example is for a presentation in a graduate public health course. The proficiency levels are 3 columns highlighted at the top. For this assignment, the subject matter expert and instructional designer went with a 3-column rubric with proficiency levels of good to excellent, fair to good, and poor to fair. These are not standardized. You may also see satisfactory, needs improvement, are not evident. The names at the top, the naming convention for the proficiency levels, like I said, are not standardized. So you'll see different things at the top, but they all kind of mean the same thing. And you also should see the score percentage at the top as well. The SME for this course wanted to have a range for each level instead of a single value. I'm sure all of you have seen many different kinds of rubrics, and it's important to know how to approach each one. So this is the fun slide. The back was supposed to appear first, and then the front, but it's all good. You'll get the idea. So the criteria are the different elements being assessed. The criteria should align with what's being asked for in the prompt. So if we could review the prompt from the previous slide, the prompt has a section which states what is required for the assignment. In this assignment, students are supposed to state their position on the issue, discuss reasons for supporting this position, support the position with data, and draw conclusions regarding the effect of policy on injury rates. The prompt goes on to say that bibliography is required and that the students will be graded on their visual aids or presenting abilities. So if you take a look at the full rubric, which is what you can see, each criteria item is listed as an element, and it's an element that's mentioned in the assignment prompt. There should always be alignment between what is asked for in the prompt and what is being assessed in the rubric. So the performance descriptors describe the observable evidence associated with each proficiency level. This is where the use of objective language becomes important. The language used to describe the evidence associated with each proficiency level should be as clear as possible. The idea is to help the students and all instructors understand the expectations for each proficiency level. When you use a rubric, you want to read over each proficiency descriptor and mark the one that the student achieved for that particular criteria item. So that kind of ends the first 2 parts of the presentation. So do you guys have any questions before I hop into Blackboard? Oh, here we go. All right, so we have a question here. For written assignments, should the rubric include the level of performance on the criteria? For example, if a concrete example is expected in the assignment, to what degree must it be present? I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Do you, Chris?
I think, well, I guess I'm looking closely at the second part of that question. If a concrete example is expected in the assignment, to what degree must it be present? That is probably that. If it isn't clear in the rubric, then that's an example of maybe something that needs to be adjusted or defined more, because you say a concrete example, and if it is clear that it is present, then that's something that is, if it's clear that it is present or not present, then that is a nice border on which to assess, because you say like, oh, it's concretely there, or it's concretely not there. So I guess like your use of the word concrete makes me, wonder if, like the rubric actually really does outline or define whether when something is concretely there or not. So if the rubric basically, if you've written the rubric well enough that it defines, whether something is whether a student has exhibited competence in a specific area by concretely showing a thing or not. If the student shows it, then it's there. If the student has exhibited competence in that area, then he or she has exhibited competence in that area.
Oh, look, here we go. Proficiency levels. Yes, Ivan, it is familiar. We used this in Ivan's course, the example rubric. So another question that was asked is, when a range is given for each rubric item, what determines the student's score within the range? And so this is a great question. What I like to say is rubrics are there to be a guide and also as extra instructions for the students for the assignment. But there needs to be room for all of you as instructors to be able to grade the way you grade. So that's why a range is there. So there might be degrees to which a student could complete a particular proficiency level where they did it satisfactorily, but not to get full points. There might be certain items that are missing. Maybe it's a relevant example, but it wasn't described clearly. That gives you the room as an instructor to really grade that criteria item. Yes, so Marta asked a great question. Is there accompanying language, verbs or adjectives, for the criteria which are good or proper to use? So yeah, we're actually, there's a full version of this that I put together for anyone who's helping to develop courses. So if you're becoming a course developer, you'll see a lot of some similar items, but it goes into more depth of how to actually create a rubric and talks about how to use low inference language when talking about the different proficiency levels or the proficiency descriptors. So we do have lists or examples of that for when you are creating rubrics. And we also have handouts for learning outcomes as well. So when you are developing those items, we have those handouts to definitely give you and support you when you have to do those tasks. But for this presentation, I didn't include those items, but if anyone's interested in them, I could definitely send them your way. Just leave a comment or do they have your contact information?
We're going to be returning with our contact information at the end of the presentation.
Perfect. So you can actually just email me, and if you would like the access to either one of those handouts, because yeah, I do have lists of verbs and adjectives that you may want to utilize over others. Oh, so Bill, you asked a great question. So should a rubric include a proficiency level for students who exceed the expectations on a specific criteria item? And yes, so a lot of times when you see a 4-column or even a 5-column rubric, you'll see a column that's for exemplary or exceptional, or I don't know what other words we use, but and that is for when students go above and beyond what our expectations are. So yeah, anyone that would like the other handouts that I have, which would be ones on learning outcomes and the ones on how to create rubrics, I can send those out to you guys, but if you could just email me after the
we
presentation.
We actually have the contact information from this webinar. So
I can just send it out to everyone. I'll just send it out to everyone and you do with it what you want. But so are there any other questions before I jump into Blackboard and show and talk about how to use that? Perfect. Well, we are in a course here. It's a master template, so there's no actual students in here, just other instructional designers who have submitted assignments for this presentation. So basically, where I like to go to grade is I like to go to Full Grade Center. You can go to needs grading, but it's just a personal preference for me. So when you go in here, you'll see one of our instructional designers has submitted some assignments for us to grade. And she submitted twice. So we're going to go in and we're going to grade this particular assignment. One thing you will notice, and we actually have another webinar that covered Safe Assign, correct? So you might want to reference that. But Christine here plagiarized her paper. But if you go in and watch our previous webinar that talks about Safe Assign, you'll see that that's not always accurate and that she'd probably dig a little deeper before saying that a student plagiarized. But in this case, I know she did. But if we go into this area, you'll see that the rubric doesn't seem to be here. It's not apparent where the rubric is. It's hiding, in fact. So if you click on this little chevron, the rubric appears. And if you open it up, what you'll see is the rubric, but there's no proficiency descriptors. So you'll have to click to show descriptions. And you also want to click to show feedback, because the beauty of these rubrics is that it allows you to provide directed feedback for these students. So for each item, for each criteria item, study design, selection, you can provide very directed feedback on that specific criteria item and tell them how they could improve, what they did better, because basically all of the assignments, all the formative assignments, are the ones that build up to the final assignment. And you want to be providing feedback that the students then can incorporate and apply on their next assignment. So formative rubrics are really used for feedback, whereas the rubric for the final assignment is used for assessment, because that's the final assignment. You still want to provide feedback, a lot of feedback, because they're going to be taking that final project and maybe using it in their real career, or using it in a different class, or maybe in their capstone to jump off and do some sort of research with. So you do still want to provide a copious amount of feedback in the final project. But the purpose of these formative assignments is really for you to provide directed feedback to make sure that student improves for the next assignment. And everything that you type in here in the feedback area will be saved. Once you click save, we'll talk about that. And it will be visible to that student upon completing your feedback. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to grade Christine. She plagiarized, so I'm not really going to give her a lot of points here. But one thing you'll notice, when I clicked not evident, or I clicked the criteria that Christine had achieved here, you'll see this drop-down box appears. Now this is very important, because if you just click, it's going to give your student these points. It auto-populates to a particular point amount or percentage. You need to choose, there's a lot of options here, how many points that student really achieved, or the percentage that student achieved on that particular criteria item. So again, she plagiarized, so she's going to get a 0. And then you would provide your feedback. Obviously, your feedback would be better than that, but again, you want to tell the student exactly what they did well, what they didn't do well, what they need to improve. So we're going to go through, we'll give her her points. So we get down here to the bottom. Now you can provide holistic feedback right here. To the student, if there's things overall that they need to improve upon. Also, there's spell check. I'm a terrible speller, so if you want to check to make sure that your items are spelled correctly when you're providing feedback to the student, there is spell check for each one of these things. So once you've completed using the rubric to grade, you have to click Save Rubric. If you don't click Save Rubric, nothing's going to be saved, and the student won't receive their feedback. So we're going to save. In this area right here, the feedback to learner section, this is actually what the student will see in their My Grades area. So it's nice to try to prompt the student to actually look at the feedback to so they can see what they did well on each criteria item. So this could be like, not so great job. Just reminding them that they should again, it can be a place for holistic feedback, but you've given them directed feedback and then holistic feedback at the bottom of the rubric. This is a place where you can say, hey, you did really well, or not so great. Make sure you review all my feedback in the rubric and let me know if you have any questions. Once you've done all of that, if you click Save as Draft, the student will not be able to see their grade. So if you want the student to see their grade and it to be submitted to Blackboard and be in the gradebook, you need to click Submit. And you'll see that here at the top, success, grade submitted. So we know that it's been submitted and we can see it in the gradebook, so we also know it's been submitted. So that to me is the big items when it comes to using the embedded rubric in Blackboard. And almost all of our courses use embedded rubrics. So knowing where to find them, the purpose of them, and how to use them and make sure you're submitting them correctly, I think are the big items. Do you guys have any questions about how to use rubrics in Blackboard? I'm going to check the questions now. Oh, okay. So Marta asked a great question. How does the rubrics get entered into Blackboard? Is it a Word document or is there a template within Blackboard? So what you're actually going to do when you're making, working with your instructional designer to build the course, you guys are going to work on rubrics for all of the assignments, and then your instructional designer will actually build the rubric into Blackboard. Oh, okay. So Ivan asked a great question too. He wants to know about using the comments within the text. So let's go back in, wondering to another assignment here. So, oh, when she doesn't submit a Word doc, it doesn't let you, does it? So Christine didn't submit a Word doc, but what happens is you can, if it's a Word document, you can actually make comments directly onto here. There'll be a toolbar up at the top, and you can click comment and put comments all the way through the paper. I have another video that I made on how to use rubrics in Blackboard, and I could send that out with everything else because it actually has an example of where I go through and make comments on the page and everything else and how to save that. So I'll just send that out as a part of the packet. So you guys, after this webinar, will be getting a how-to on how to make rubrics, a how-to on how to use rubrics in Blackboard, and a learning outcomes handout on how to construct learning outcomes. So that will all be headed your way after this presentation. But does anyone else have questions about using rubrics within Blackboard or any other part of this presentation?
I'm going to just jump in and say real quick that the the PDF that is shown right now and Sarah's inability to mark it up is one of the reasons that you got to be very clear in the instructions for every assignment. If that's something that you want to be able to do with your students, then that's something that you and your instructional designer, and I think that's called inline grading.
Yes.
Yeah, inline grading in Blackboard. If that's really important to you and to your process for giving feedback to students, especially like spatially contextual feedback, where you're like, this area of your paper really is where it falls apart. That's important, and that's the type of thing that you work with your instructional designer in defining as essential to the success of that assignment. And then we make that very clear in the instructions for the assignment, and maybe in cases where it's very, very important, even include that in the assessment half, where we say, like, if you didn't submit this as a Word doc, then you'll get docked for it.
Ooh, and on top of that, I forgot to mention, one thing that I run into a lot when I teach courses in Blackboard is that my students tend to submit their assignments using a Pages format or some other off-brand of Word that that Blackboard doesn't read. So you won't even be able to open the file in this area if it's not a Word doc or a PDF or the other files. I think those are the big ones.
The Word doc, PDF, yeah.
Pictures, JPEGs and stuff like
JPEG.
that will open. But so if you try to open a student's file in this area and it doesn't work, most likely they submitted it as a file that's not recognizable by the Crocodoc reader, which is, so what you'd want to do is reach out to that student and say, hey, can you save this as a PDF and then resubmit, or save this as a Word doc and a .doc or a .docx and resubmit. That's most likely what happened when the file cannot be read.
And just about all of those, including Pages, I believe Pages you can actually save for Word.
Yep, and as a PDF.
And as a PDF. So, you know, reach for the stars and tell the student to save it as, you know, as you would prefer to receive it, because most of those programs allow you to save for Word. And that includes Google Docs. You can download as a Word file, Pages, and anything else that comes to mind, including like OpenOffice or LibreOffice. So even if they're working in a pretty esoteric program, they should be able to save it in such a way that you will be able to mark it up in Blackboard.
And I would like to add that if you are making the inline comments, which are very valuable, inline comments are very valuable. You still want to give that directed feedback for each criteria item in the rubric, because there are some students that actually won't make that connection between what you're saying in the inline comments and how those inline comments relate to each specific criteria item. So you still want to make sure that you're providing feedback in the rubric, even if you are providing feedback in the paper directly inline. Well, it doesn't seem like we have any other questions unless someone shouts out at the last minute. So we do have one more poll that we would like to send out to all of you. Chris is going to do that now. So now that you've viewed the webinar, and you know you're getting handouts, but I would like to know if there's any other handouts that you guys would like. You know, I'm always creating handouts. Chris is always creating handouts. So we would like to know what would be really valuable to you as instructors. And again, you'll have my contact information at the end. So if there's something that you want to know more about when it comes to rubrics, learning outcomes, because I just made a handout on that, or using Blackboard for grading, let me know and I can create that for you. All right, so how to create a rubric, you'll be getting that video. But if you do want more of information once you've viewed the video, I love me some rubrics, so I would have a conversation with you about it. How to use rubrics in Blackboard, how to use rubrics for feedback and assessment. And that seems to be the top one, and that isn't one I've created yet, so I will get to it. And then 13% of you are not Catholic. Anyway, it's been great speaking with to you. And the webinar series that Chris and Olga put on is really valuable. So keep coming back. I'm going to turn you back over to Chris.
All right, fantastic. And since we're going to be emailing all of you, I'm going to forego giving out the contact information, since it's going to be going your way anyway, as long as we'll include a URL to where you can, to the site. It's on online.une.edu. You can see all of everyone who works at the College of Graduate and Professional Studies for UNE Online. Oh, we have some closing questions. Is there a UNE standard for software? Can they get Microsoft Office through the bookstore at a student rate? Yes, they can. Also, as I mentioned before, and there's actually an article to this point. Thank you for the question, Sharon, because it is important. And we are asking students, even with the discount, to spend money. You know, it's a decent amount of money on Office. They can use Pages. They can also use Google Drive, which is free, to create a Google Doc and then download it as a Microsoft Word file, which is actually something that we've put together instructions for on vision, and have sometimes steered students that direction, just in case, they want to need to save money, or they find themselves suddenly, like with a different computer, if, like, and they don't have Office on that computer. There are plenty of options for students to work on documents, and then save them as a Word doc. And then we have a question. What do students see in my grades based on the rubric feedback? Oh,
that's a great question, Bill.
Sarah wants to take this one.
All right, so that's a great question because, and I mean, we could make a handout because it's always interesting when you're an instructor. You're like, what do the students actually see? So that area that I typed in, make sure to review my feedback in the rubric. That's what they see in their My Grades area. And then right next to their My Grades, or right next to that comment, is View Rubric, a View Rubric button. So then they'd click on that, and they'd see the rubric, and they'd see the proficiency level that you chose for each criteria item and your feedback on each criteria item. So they're only, right when they go into My Grades area, they're only going to see that comment you leave right before you click Submit. And that's why you want to prompt them to look at the rubric, because then the View Rubric button's right next to it, and they'll be like, oh, he wants me to look at the comments in the rubric. I'll just click this button and see all of them. So that's what the students see. Yep, the PowerPoint, Sharon, will be a part of what I send out. I turn the PowerPoint into a video, but all of the information will be in there. Oh, I am so glad that you love rubrics, Lorelei. All right, well, it's been fun, everybody.
All right, fantastic. And again, this is going to be going up. So we're going to have a redundancy of videos, but who cares? We're going to be putting up this and other elements up on Vision, and you will be receiving handouts, and everyone will be happy and awesome. And we will come back with another webinar next month. And I'm blanking on that. Discussion boards. So that'll be on February. Let me go to it real quick. I think it's February 14th, but I'm blanking.
It's on Valentine's Day?
It's not on Valentine's. No, that must be wrong. So February 16th, Tuesday, February 16th at 10:15 a.m.
Oh, it's not on discussion board.
That'll be on using peer assessment in Blackboard. So look forward to that, and we will see you then. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll be sending out invites to that webinar upcoming. Thank you.
Bye.